Thalassophobia, the persistent and intense fear of deep bodies of water, is one of the most common phobias out there, and it's really not hard to see why, as there are plenty of animals lurking in the depths that look or act rather unfriendly. And this notion of oceans and seas being scary is nothing new, as prehistoric waters were just as scary, with them more often than not being way more terrifying than they are today, with the Mesozoic period in particular being a great time for aquatic nightmares. Although, if you keep going back and back, like hundreds of millions of years back, you will eventually arrive at a point where the waters of Earth were actually fairly mundane and somewhat safe, with the Cambrian period, which took place 500 million years ago, being about the last time where you would have been completely safe swimming anywhere in the ocean. Which is interesting, as it was actually a period of immense diversity, as well as the time when fish first evolved, who, as we know, eventually gave way to things like this, and this. So when did it all go wrong? When did the waters of Earth go from being safe to a big no-no? One could argue that it was the Ordovician, since it saw the rise of the first aquatic creatures you'd be quite wary to swim next to, large cephalopods. But to be honest, even then, the waters weren't all that scary. No, it wouldn't be until 419 million years ago that the Earth's waters would finally receive an abundance of horrors that essentially guaranteed that something like a human was no longer safe treading in the water, and thus signifying the moment in which thalassophobia originated, so to speak. This was the Devonian, also known as the Age of Fish. This moment in Earth's history transpired when the world was dominated by water, and any map would have resembled a true water world, with 85% of the surface being covered by oceans and seas, as opposed to just the 70% today. And if the sea levels back then were brought to the present, then our maps would look something like this. At the time, the globe was dominated by 4 large bodies of water that no longer exist: the Panthalassic, the Rheic, the Prototethys, and the Paleotethys. Each one was quite sizable by modern standards, yet the Panthalassic was the only one considered to be a true superocean, being significantly larger than the Pacific, with its widest point having been 2 times greater. This means that in some areas you wouldn't be able to find land in any direction for thousands of miles or kilometers, making it a true nightmare for anyone with thalassophobia. Yet ironically, it wasn't the deep ocean that you had to worry about, as all the heebie-jeebie animals seemed to have been concentrated in the waters around the landmasses, which were just as weird and unrecognizable as the oceans were. In the center of the equator, you wouldn't have found Africa, but Euro-America, a continent composed of present-day Europe and North America, which was surrounded on all sides by water and smaller islands. Meanwhile, to the north, you'd run into Siberia and Kazakhstania, both islands as well. And this trend of being marooned continued to the east, where South and North China both lay separated from one another. While in the south, the largest continent of the time was found, Gondwana, which was composed of Antarctica, India, Arabia, Australia, Africa, and South America. The seas and oceans bordering these landmasses were filled with a huge selection of panic-inducing creatures, with the highlighted sections in particular showing areas best to avoid, as this is where evolution produced the first giant-jawed fish. Now, these guys have been around since the Silurian, but it was only during the Devonian that they leveled up, perhaps thanks to the equable and stable temperate conditions of the time. Whatever the case, something did the trick, as Devonian Earth unlocked a superfamily of fish so lethal that they remain iconic to this day, the Dunkleosteoidea. This was a group of placoderms, or armored fish, that emerged during the early Devonian, and quickly took over the majority of aquatic ecosystems, becoming the largest predators around and possessing the most formidable tools. Of the bunch, I'm sure you recognize the biggest and baddest one, the Dunkleosteus, who was in many ways the Earth's original sea monster, as it was the first multi-ton predator that could hunt anything, pretty much anywhere. This large fish loved to stalk shallow coastal waters, but could still be found in open oceans, and is known to have lived throughout North America, Europe, and Africa, making it one difficult creature to avoid, which is very unfortunate, as this thing was kind of like a great white on steroids, having been far more robust and chunky, while also possessing highly durable armor composed of dermal bone that formed a large plate along its entire skull in the front section of its trunk. So if you got caught, there would be no point in trying to fight it. And even without the armor, this monstrosity was also far too large to be bothered by a punch or kick. However, its true size is something of a mystery, as its armored head was usually the only thing that became fossilized once it died, leading to some very diverse size estimates. And these predicted sizes range from 4.1 to 10 meters, or 13 to 33 feet. But for now, the largest reliable estimates are considered to be 5 meters or 16 feet, equivalent to the length of a decently sized great white. Yet, because of its build, even smaller Dunkleosteus could still be over 2 tons, which is greater than the weight of the heaviest recorded great whites. And one should keep in mind that because of the scarcity in the fossil record, it's very possible that larger specimens are out there. But regardless, many people think that its size reduction is a good thing in terms of helping it seem less ominous. But if anything, it would have made the Dunkleosteus that much greater of a threat to human-sized prey, as something of our size suddenly becomes a very nice snack. And let me tell you, it would have gotten this snack with incredible ease, as it had one of the deadliest jaws ever, having been equipped with a titanic mouth which was aligned not with teeth, but with literal giant plates of bone that were extremely sharp and could close with such extreme power that when the tips of the fang connected, they generated up to 80,000 pounds per square inch of pressure, which is not only greater than anything seen in any living or extinct fish, but even more powerful than the force generated by a 50 caliber gun. And then when you combine this force with its pseudo teeth, it would have been able to cleave through bone and tough armor like it was made of hot butter. And it somehow gets even worse, because even if you did see this prehistoric jaws coming for you, and were able to somehow get ahead of it, you would still get chopped up, because the Dunkleosteus opened its jaws in a very peculiar way, using a 4-bar linkage mechanism, which is seen in pump jacks, which allowed it to open its mouth with crazy speed, achieving maximum opening within 20 to 60 milliseconds, so basically twice as fast as you can blink. And the problem with this is that this absurd quickness created a suction effect every time its jaws were opened, meaning that any prey in front of it would soon find itself not in front of it, and allowing for a clean, devastating, and likely fatal bite. And we were actually able to see what kind of damage it did, as scientists located a specimen of Titanicthis and another Dunkleosteus, which bore severe damage attributed to a Dunkleosteus, showing just how effective its bite was against large animals, and highlighting that nothing was safe from its grasps, not even itself. The dunk alone made the Devonian waters the last place you'd want to swim, but it was just the tip of the iceberg, as it was joined by more than 10 others of its own kind, many that were within limb-removing size, and a few that would definitely have liked to snack on something human-sized, as seen with the Eastmanosteus and Westralichthus, both large Dunkleosteoids which were around bull shark size and located in Australia. And as a superfamily, the dunks achieved a near universal range and were around for basically the entire Devonian, so no matter at what point or where you were at, you could expect to find at least one overpowered aquatic Pac-Man. And unbeknownst to most, there was even a Dunkleosteoid around that was actually bigger than the Dunkleosteus, at least from a length standpoint, the Heterosteus. This creature was known to roam the waters of Europe and Greenland, and while it did not exactly look like a close relative of the Dunkleosteus, it sure was, despite sharing a closer appearance with present-day whale sharks. And its eerily similar looks to whale sharks is likely the result of convergent evolution, as paleontologists think that the Heterosteus might have actually been a planktivorous animal, meaning it fed on plankton. This allowed it to grow to massive sizes, with one species, the Asmusi, having reached an estimated length of 6 meters or 20 feet, akin to a decently sized orca. And though it is expected to be planktivorous, there is still the possibility that Heterosteus was actually more of a voracious hunter, who perhaps used its wide flat body to stick to the floor and stage ambushes kind of like how a Pacific stargazer does. Plus, even if it was a gentle giant, its appearance still wasn't exactly the most conducive to mental or physical health if you swam into it unaware. And coincidentally, there was another example of a similar situation, but with an animal that was even more likely to be a filter feeder, and that is the Titanicthus. Funnily enough, despite looking more like a dunk than the Heterosteus did, this giant was actually part of a different placoderm superfamily, the Dinichthyloidea. And while it was a harmless filter feeder, who used a small unsharpened mouth to suck in small fish, it still might have given you a heart attack if swimming straight for you, as it was an absolute unit, measuring up to 7.6 meters or 25 feet, which if accurate, likely made it the biggest fish on Earth at the time. And to make it even more unappealing, it sported very prominent and large fins that gave it almost a shark-like vibe, especially if you didn't get a good glimpse at what it was. Meanwhile, the rest of its family were thankfully much smaller, but not necessarily friendlier, as some of them, like the Bungartius and Dinichthus, were pretty much dunk mimics, having had sharp fangs, powerful jaws, and grew to respectable sizes with these two measuring over 3 meters or 10 feet. And in the case of the Bongaritis, it also had a built-in spear at the end of its mouth that made it that much more intimidating and deadly to its prey. Now, these guys, paired with the Dunkleosteoids, were likely more than enough to fill anyone's desire for thalassophobia. Though, you don't get to be called the Age of Fish for just producing a few memorable groups. And sure enough, the Devonian gave birth to multiple other unsettling animals that often get very little attention, one such example being the Onychodontiforms. This order, a primitive lobed fish, was globally distributed throughout the Devonian, and was actually one of the first to diverge from the coelacanth lineage. However, if you saw one up close, you'd likely not be able to appreciate its evolutionary importance, as these fish were among those that were very much lethal to big-bodied prey, reaching quite impressive sizes. What really made them deadly, though, was their highly unique skulls and jaws that kind of resembled those seen in snakes, and were highly flexible and kinetic, thanks to their heads being stitched together by loose bones that at some points weren't even connected. This allowed them to strike prey at great speeds, without the risk of skull fractures, and let them consume prey many times bigger than other similar-sized predators could. And this all reached a climax in the Onychodus, the largest member of this order to have ever lived, and the biggest bony fish during the entire Middle Devonian. This menace was known to have a cosmopolitan range, meaning it popped up anywhere it could, and was found in both shallow and deep waters. There, adults grew up to 4 meters or 12 feet in length, and sometimes weighed over 350 pounds or 160 kilograms, equivalent to the weight of a female lion. This makes it quite hefty even by modern terms, and yet it was remarkably stealthy, with paleontologists thinking that it used its sturdy front fins to quote-unquote walk along a reef or slowly drift beneath the unsuspecting victim, before using its giant backtail to rapidly strike it, causing devastating damage. And many times, it might have simply swallowed the animal whole. And thanks to an actual specimen found with a plachioderm inside it, we know that occasionally, these fish would gulp down prey half their length in a single motion. So imagine something, basically human-sized, being suddenly gulped whole. Suddenly, you may not feel so safe around this guy. Though truthfully, you might have hoped for a swallowed ending, as the alternative was much worse, because each Onychodus, as well as all of its relatives, had giant needle-like teeth throughout its entire mouth, that punctured deep within flesh with ease. And at the very front, they had even bigger tusk-like teeth that were arranged in whorls and were literally retractable, granting these predatory fish the ability to freely move these enlarged teeth around and essentially thrust them, and thus giving Onychodontiforms just one more way in which they could kill you. Another interesting group of fish you'd be almost guaranteed to see were what I like to call the copycat sharks, scientifically known as Thalassophobia. Like sharks, these fish were cartilaginous and looked a lot like them, but they were not true sharks, and were likely more closely related to chimeras, who ironically themselves are nicknamed ghost sharks. Breaking from the usual trend seen in the other Devonian groups, this family had a fairly limited range, with remains being known from just Morocco and North America, where they were represented by 2 different genera, the Thalassophobia and the Maghrebophobia. But surprisingly, despite having a small range, these shark-like fish are actually well understood, thanks to some remarkable specimens who retain traces of skin, muscle fibers, and internal organs. These finds have shown researchers that across the 2 kinds, Thalassophobia, were typically about the same size as reef sharks, and had heads quite similar to what's seen in frilled sharks, while their bodies were more reminiscent of mackerel sharks, indicating a high degree of agility and speed, a hypothesis further proven by the discovery of stomach content, which showed that they would routinely eat prey tail first. The remains found in their stomachs also display their ability to hunt down a wide range of animals, as ray-finned bony fish, conodonts, hag-like fish, and arthropods were all located within it. It's thought that to kill these various animals, Thalassophobia would use their 3-pronged teeth to tightly grip prey, which could then be swallowed or shaken until killed. They were also one of the first vertebrates to evolve teeth replacement, helping them both to maintain their sharpness and giving them the ability to go all out on victims without having to worry about tooth damage. So now this group, in addition with the Onychodontiforms, Dunkleosteoids, and their mimics, really made the Devonian a world ran, or swam, by fish. But like any good horrific moment in Earth's history, there was of course non-fish creatures in the water as well, that were also highly questionable. The most notable of which were the Eurypterids, or as most know them, the sea scorpions. Now they definitely looked a lot like scorpions, superficially that is, but these arthropods